Hi everyone, I'm Simon from Homesite, and today we're going to be looking at the basics of Node-RED. Now, it's a bit of a beginner's guide, however, it might fill in some gaps if you've been using it for a little while. Now, I've got a lot of automations I can show you, and this is the first one of many videos on Node-RED. Let's go! So first of all, I'm assuming you've got Node-RED installed. If you haven't, take a look at the top, because I've got a guide for it. Now, what is Node-RED? It is a big canvas, or multiple canvases, where you can drop on triggers, you can drop on inputs, outputs, and processes. And that's essentially what it is. It's a way of taking an input and triggering an output. And that input might be a time, it might be a doorbell, it might be anything you want. If you can imagine it, you can pretty much make it happen. And quite frankly, it's brilliant. So let's start taking a look. So I've opened Node-RED and we are running version 1.1.3, just for reference. So starting here on the left hand side, these are all of the nodes that are installed. Now these things here, these are all these little squares here, these little rectangles. We can drag those on, and we can drag multiple versions of these on, and they are nodes. Up here we've got different flows. Now this is what I like to call a canvas, so we can drag multiple nodes onto a single canvas, but it is important to remember that this is a flow, and if we string together a few of these nodes, that is technically called a sequence, not a flow. Might seem daft, but it'll all make sense at the end. So we can have multiple versions, multiple flows up here, and we can name them just by double clicking and calling this whatever you like. You can put description in. I'm just going to call this demo just for today. Now you'll notice we've got this deploy button that goes red. Now if I drag anything on, for example, I'm going to drag on one of these event state nodes. As soon as I've made any changes, this button will go red, and I have to press deploy before it then takes effect. So you can do anything you like until you hit that deploy, and that will then push out those changes. So over here on the right hand side, you've got various things. Now we're in info at the moment, so we can see, drop down all the flows and see the nodes that are in that flow. The really useful one here, there is a help one, so you can look up various bits of help. The debug, now that's really useful as well. Now we'll come back to putting a debug node on and how we use that. Now by default this is going to look at all the nodes in all the flows. Now you can change this to be selected nodes or just the current flow, and I find that pretty useful, especially when you're debugging a new sequence that you're putting in. Up here we've got a hamburger menu, and yes, that is what that's called. There's 3 lines, it's called a hamburger menu. We can click on that. Now one of the cool things is the ability to input or export flows. Now if I press import, I can just copy and paste in the JSON language, which you might be familiar with by now. You can paste that in and it will add it all into this node, add it all into this flow rather. Or you can export it. So if you're looking for help, you put it on one of those helpful communities on Facebook, you can export your flow and other people can import it and try and fault find it for you, which is pretty cool. Another thing down here I'm going to point out is called the manage palette. Now there's certain things in here, these are all of the palettes that are currently installed, but there's a bunch of them that aren't installed. 2,869 are available, and if there's something in particular you want, you might want let's just put in time and see what comes up. There's a time switch there, and that might be the one that you want. Now you can do most things with the standard ones, but for example there's some really good ones for Sonos. Now I'm a bit of a Sonos fan, I like my Sonos system. There's some great Sonos nodes that we can install, but I'm not going to do any of those right now. It is just a case of pressing install and sitting and waiting. I'm going to press close to that. So now we're back at our canvas. So let's create our very first sequence on our demo flow. So we've already dragged on our event state, so this is the first thing we're going to use. Now this is going to look at when something changes. It's going to then check to see whether what you've entered is true or false. So let's show you. So if you double click on the node, you'll be able to see here, yours will just show add a new server to start with. So this is you only need to set this server up once, but if you click on the little pencil, we can give it a name. Now I'm going to just leave mine as Home Assistant. We can tick I use the Home Assistant add-on, and all you've got to do is hit add. Now if you don't use the Home Assistant add-on, you will have to put in the IP address of the Home Assistant server as well as an access token. Now, easiest way is just to keep it on your Home Assistant instance and allow it to manage it. Now I've already got mine set up, so I'm just going to click Home Assistant. Now I'm going to click select an entity ID. Now these will normally pre-populate. Now I'm going to run it from a PIR, which I have here on my desk. So this is a binary sensor type. Now if you're not sure what it's called, I like this on the little hammer here in the developer tools, we can look up all of our entities. So we can find our PIR side, and in fact if we trigger it, we can even see the state change. You see that went from off to on. So we can copy it from here, or it should pre-populate. Now we know that, as we just looked in developer tools, when it's triggered it goes to on. So we can say if state is on. Now you've got various options there. You can say it's not, it's greater than, it's less than, and you might be using some of those for some of your lights, for example. If something is greater than or less than. So if state is on in this case, and I'm going to want it to go immediately for 0 minutes, then you could change that to if it's on for 5 minutes or 5 milliseconds, 5 days, for example. So we're going to keep it nice and simple, and this is for 0 minutes means it's going to trigger as soon as it happens. Now, nice thing as well, friendly name, I'm going to call this PIR on. Done. So you can see that's changed the name now, and it's got these two little points here. Now if you hover over them, we can see that pops up and says if state is true or if state is false. Now, the very next node we're going to string together is a call service node. Now this is a do something. For example, turn on a light, turn off a light, toggle a light. So we're going to drag from this point here, if state is true, if PIR is on, we want it to run this call service node. And if we double click on that, it'll ask us to configure it. And I'm going to call it light on. Server, that's the one that we configured earlier on, Home Assistant. Domain, now I'm going to have a switch turn on. So I can put in there switch. Alternatively, you can just click on the drop down and it should give you all of the domains that are available in your network. Now I've got quite a few because I've got quite a complex system. You could be a light, it could be an MQTT system. Now all I'm going to do is just do a basic switch. Now the service, if you click on that, gives you the options toggle, turn off or turn on. Well, when the PIR is triggered, I want to turn that on. Now we can click on our entity ID. Now this isn't going to pop up with a full list, but when you start to type, it should appear. So I'm going to put in boot room. Now I've got a little boot room light, and this PIR, let's pretend it's in the boot room. The data here, now for this basic functionality, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to put any additional data in. For some things you will. For a dimmer, for example, you need to tell it what to do. You need to tell it what brightness to put it on. For an RGBW controller, you need to tell it what level of red, what level of green, what level of blue. So for this one, nice and simple, we don't need to do anything. I'm just going to press done to that. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. Now, simple case of selecting and pressing Ctrl C and Ctrl V like you normally would in any other application. Now I'm going to wire if this is false, and I want that to turn off. Now my PIR is set up that 5 seconds after it's turned on, it automatically turns off. Now that's in the configuration.yaml. So what I should see now, if I press deploy, oops, I forgot to change the name, light off. What I should see now, if I trigger this PIR, it should turn the light on for 5 seconds and then off again. Pretty cool, right? So I'm going to go to my overview just so you can see. Here's a visual representation of my house that I've created in Lovelace. And if I now move this PIR, what you should see is this is here is my boot room, it's turned on, and then 5 seconds later, it's turned off. Fantastic. So that's our first simple little flow. Now, you want your PIR to trigger, but you don't want it to turn off straight away. So you want your PIR to be off again so you can watch out for your next motion. However, we don't want that to be turning off after 5 seconds. So one of the other nodes, which is really useful, now you can scroll down to try and find it, which is there, a delay, or you could just start typing up here. I find this really useful. I'm going to start typing delay, and I'm going to drag that down here. Now, one thing you'll notice, if I drop it over the top of the line's gone dotted. So this is going to put it in line between PIR on and light off. It's done it for me. Now I'm just going to move it around, make it look a bit nicer. Now this is going to delay for 5 seconds. So once it's gone off, I want to delay for, let's say, another 10 seconds. So that's going to be 15 seconds delay. And I'm going to call this 10 sec delay. And deploy. So now, if I come back to my overview and I wave my PIR, it should turn the light on, and 15 seconds later, it should turn it off. Now, delays are really useful in multiple cases. This is just one simple example. Now, what we also might find is that we want to interrupt that delay. So once we've started it, it will sit there, and then it will eventually trigger after that fixed period of time. However, there is a method of saying, actually, I want to cancel that delay. And that's quite simple, but we'll come back to that later. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few other nodes onto here. The first one I'm going to show you is an inject. Now, my PIR is nice and simple. I can unclip it from its base and bring it into my office where I'm doing this film. Now, it might not be so simple. You might want to simulate that PIR going off. So I've just dragged on this inject node, and I can wire that into my light on. And once I press deploy, you'll see the last time that was triggered was 22:16. I can press that little button here to the left hand side of the inject node, and it will trigger it. So that's now gone to 22:18. So that's turned the light on. Now what it won't have done is obviously kicked off the delay or the light off, so I can come back to here and see that that light is on. I'm just going to turn it off manually for now. Now then, if I find something isn't working, if for example I put on with 2 ends and deploy, if I trigger this, waiting for this to go to running, there we go, I trigger this, it's not going to run. It's going to run my light off. Now that's not my expected result, just because of a simple typo. So sometimes we might need to debug, but it's not as bad as it sounds. We're going to look for a debug node. I'm going to drag that here. I'm just going to remove this inject node. Just remove the wire from there. Now I'm going to say if state is true, I want to go to my message.payload debug. I'm also going to do if the state is false, I still want to go to this debug node. Now over here on the right hand side, I mentioned earlier on, there's a debug little icon. Now there could be a lot of messages in there. Now I have been a little bit untidy clearly, and I've got a lot of debug nodes still running. Now you can press the little clear log button. I'm going to change this item here to current flow. Now this is only going to bring up errors or anything in debug node. on this flow itself. Now remember, this demo, this whole canvas is a flow. So I'm going to press deploy. And now when I trigger my PIR, it's going to send any output from these up to here. So that's my PIR triggered, and that's showing me that my message.payload is gone to on and it's gone to off. So I can check in here and think, I've made a typo, and correct it. And now I will get my expected result when I press deploy. Now that's really, really useful. Now, what is this message.payload? The payload is held between two nodes. Now, the payload from this light on, is likely to be different. So I'm going to change this one to 1. I'm going to call that just number 1. I'm going to copy it with Control C, Control V. I'm going to wire it up to my light on, and I'm going to change that to 2. Now what we find, if I clear my log and deploy, now when I trigger my PIR, this has gone to on in 1, and 2 is also on. But it could be that this is something entirely different. It could have modified that payload. Now this is the message that this light.on is going to send on. Now it might be a confirmation, it could be anything. But notice that the message from PIR to light on has now been overruled, because that message.payload is always overwritten by every single node. Now that's pretty cool, that's pretty useful. However, sometimes you want to remember what's been sent in the first instance. Now we can do that by using other variables. We can use flow variables, which exist in the whole flow, which is why it's important to remember that demo, this whole canvas, is a flow. We can also use global variables, which are able to go between flows, and in fact they exist across the whole of the Node-RED instance. The next thing I'm going to show you is a change node. Now a change node, I'm going to drag that in here, and I'm going to drop it in between my debug 2 and my light on. Now I'm going to have this change my message.payload, okay, so msg.payload, and I'm going to have it change to boot room light is on. I'm just going to put that as change message for now. Now then, if I press deploy, wait for this to go from disconnected to running, wave at my PIR, we should see that node 1, you can see that it says there node 1, still says on, but node 2, this one here, says boot room light is on. So we've changed that message within our payload. Now that's quite useful. But what we might want to do is say, actually, I want to set the, I want to change that to a flow dot boot room light status. I might want to put that as on, because I might want to use that somewhere else in this flow. I might want to trigger that to start something else. I might want to put that onto a delay. I can do anything I like with that. Now another node that I'm going to show you is called the time range node. Now that's quite useful, and I'm going to put that in between my light on. I can drag all of these and space them out a bit more. Now I'm going to say I want this between anything between 8 PM and 0800. I'm going to say 8 to 20 till 0800 hours, and done. Now this is going to say if it's between 8 at night and 8 in the morning, and that I'm within that time, so I can hover over that point and that says within, or outside of that time. So if I'm within that time, I want the light to turn on. If I'm out of that time, I don't want it to do anything. I can press deploy. Now at the moment I'm out of that time, So if I run my PIR, it's going to turn that light on. There we go. And in about 10 seconds, it should turn it back off. There we go, it's off. So if someone were to trigger this PIR outside of that time, i.e. in the day, then that light wouldn't turn on. Where I live in the UK, we don't have fixed sunset and sunrises because that'd be too easy. So you might want to say, actually, I want to start this at sunset and sunrise. And I could say, actually, sunrise plus 1 hour and sunset minus 1 hour. And I can press done. Now if I want it to be more accurate, I should put my lat and long in there really, which I could just do from a postcode or a zip code lookup. I can press done, deploy, and now that's going to check, hang on a minute, is the sun, and I should change the name of that really as well, sunset to sunrise, deploy. Now if this PIR has been triggered during the day while the sun has risen, then it's not going to go off. But outside of that time, after the sun has set, it is going to go off. So, like I said at the beginning, Node-RED is fantastic, and I hope you can start to see some of the uses. Now, if you can draw the flow or the logic on a whiteboard or on a bit of paper, then you can make it happen. It is limited only by your imagination. So this, like I said earlier on, is the first video of many that I'm going to do looking at exploring Node-RED. I've been Simon from Homesite. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and make sure you don't miss the next one. See you next time.